My name is Gearge Saddington and I'm 77. The team that I support is the team that Ben supports and his father supports. I support and my father supported Leyton Orient Football Club. Well, for a number of reasons really. My father was a great Leyton Orient supporter and he took me over, and I can't remember when it actually was. I just remember that the team that I saw when I was about 5 or 6 had red and white hoops shirts on. But the real reason is actually I saw Leicester City before I saw Leyton Orient. I was evacuated up at Leicester, and the house that I was evacuated to was at the back of the Leicester City Stadium. And they used to allow us in, the children in, on a Saturday afternoon at half-time free of charge. So I started seeing football up at Leicester, but I was only 6 or 7 at the time, so I wasn't terribly interested in football. When I got home, I did become interested. Well, the first match that I actually saw was Leyton Orient Probables versus Leyton Orient Possibles. Now, you don't get that these days. You always have these games that are friendlies before the season started, but I went to start seeing Orient in 1945. It was just at the end of the war, so they didn't have these warm-up games. There was Leyton Orient Probables, who were the first team basically, and the Possibles were either the older or the younger players who hoped to get into the team. And that would have been in about late August or early September of 1945, so it's a long time ago. I know that the Probables won 7-0, so they were obviously going to be the Leyton Orient team for the coming year. If I could say just a little bit about it, the reason we went to this match was that where I lived, which was in Leyton, very near the cricket ground, the Borough Council used to organise a Happy Holidays programme for people to go and do various things and see various entertainment. And right at the end of it was free tickets for these Leyton Orient trial games. So that's why I went there at the time. Well, yes, a lot, but the memories are not so much about the matches. Obviously, there were some very big matches that I've watched over the years, like Leyton Orient versus Arsenal in the Cup. That had an attendance of about 30,000 people there at the time in 1952. But it was the conditions that the players actually had to contend with in those days. At Leyton Orient, the ground was very, very close to Hackney Marshes and Lake Marshes, so you often had to contend with fog. The pitches were very, very bad back in the 1940s and 50s, even the early 60s. The drainage was bad, so lots and lots of mud. The ball was very heavy. And you have to remember in those days that they didn't have any floodlights, so the kick-off times changed at various times, so that on a day like this, when it's going to be dark by 4:30, they'd have to kick off at 2 o'clock. And up in Scotland, they used to kick off at 12 o'clock to get the game finished. But, so I remember very much players ploughing through mud in sort of dark, foggy conditions with a very heavy ball, and of course they were really up against it. But lots and lots of good matches. The match that sticks in my mind from this particular period was in 1950, when Orient were drawn at home against Arsenal. Now, Arsenal were a really big team, even bigger than they are at the moment. You know, Arsenal were the great team. I can remember queuing up with my brothers all night to get tickets for this game, and the mighty Arsenal came and played on the Saturday for about half hour, or it was playing very, very well. Then suddenly Arsenal knocked in 3 very quick goals, and that was it. Or it were playing in what was then called the 3rd Division South, they didn't have a fourth division or third division in those days, and they separated all the teams up. All those virtually above Northampton were the North of England club, third division North, and we Orient were in the third division South. So no one had to travel too far to play games. So it's that was quite interesting. Orient, another great game was when Orient actually got out of that division in 1955. By that time, I was just got into the army, but I used to come home on weekends and watch them play, and they had they won 6-0, I think, in the last game of the season. They went up by five or 6 points, and that was the first really major effort or promotion that Orient had ever got. Well, when I started watching it regularly, which was in the late 1940s, and I was thinking about this question only yesterday, it has changed totally. We mentioned just now that there were no floodlights in those days. Floodlights didn't get into the Orient until in the 60s, so obviously they had to alter the kick-off times. Pitches were bad because of lack of drainage, but on top of that, we tend to forget that no substitutions were allowed back in the 40s and 50s. So if anyone got injured, invariably what happened was that they weren't taken off on a stretcher. They were just asked to play upfield as a centre forward, not make any tackles, but they'd stay on the field even if they were limping around. So that was one thing. The second thing was, of course, that you could have back passes in those days, so the goalkeeper could actually pick the ball up. That's one of the few new rules which I agree with totally, because it was a good time-wasting tactic. But I think the thing that sticks in my mind is how big the crowds were, because you didn't really have very much television back in the early 1950s, and with the exception of cinema, there wasn't a great deal to do, so you had very, very big crowds. And Lake Orient, who would be very happy to have a crowd of 7,000 or 8,000 people now, used to get regularly in the early 50s crowds of over 20,000. And one Easter, I remember going along to a game on the Saturday against Ipswich Town with 31,000 people. It was like 31,000 people at a third division game, and then on the Monday, 2 days later, 33,000 people against Torquay. So it's the big crowds and the way that the crowds used to dress. Virtually all of the supporters used to wear hats. If you ever see any old newsreels of old cup finals and things like that, see everyone's got either a trilby hat on or a flat cap. And I can remember very well as a young lad, on the Boxing Day games, you'd go over to the Orient and the place would be awash with the smell of cigar smoke. People could smoke there. They would all be standing, and there would be new scarves and new hats, and everyone had this smell of new eau de cologne. It was a special day, Boxing Day, and a very different feeling. The other thing I can remember about, it's got really nothing to do with football, but because of the big crowds, the authorities felt that it would be a good idea to have some sort of either half-time entertainment or something before the match started. So occasionally they'd have a brass band or a marching band, but on one occasion I remember they had a magician out on the middle of the pitch, and this magician built a sort of square box, and he had this young lady who went into this box. She went into the box and you look behind and you could see through to the crowd on the other side, and they put the box together and he went like that and the four sides, and she disappeared, and no one to this day can remember how it happened, because there was nowhere for her to go. I mean, she couldn't go down a trap door or side loft somewhere. I still talk to this about people. How did they manage to do that? Quite incredible. I think they're the major things that I can think about, that the major differences between today and 40, 50 years ago. Well, that's a difficult question, Ben, because there have been so many great Orient players, even though they were in the third and the second division. People like Laurie Cunningham and John Chidozi, who were sold to other clubs. Cunningham actually went and played for Real Madrid. But I'm going back to the period I've been talking about, and my favourite player of that period was Tommy Johnson. Everyone says Tommy Johnson because he was such a marvellous scorer of goals. When he came to Orient and when he left Orient, he always wore on his left hand plaster, which defenders used to say he used to use to knock them out. He was a miner and he was involved in a mining accident, and his left arm was broken and his wrist never quite repaired, so he always used to wear this. And he saw some of the great goals when Orient were getting into their stride in the 1950s. He was sold to Blackburn Rovers, who were then in the First Division, which is now the Premiership, and he stayed with them for 2 years, and he was their top goal scorer then. And then he came back to Orient and he was their top goal scorer then. And I can remember, the thing about Tommy that I remember now, all these years ago, was that when he jumped up into the air, he had this sort of facility to actually stay there, you know, to go up and he'd hover before he headed the ball in. And a lot of the Orient fans and some of the players used to say that he would head the ball a lot harder and faster than a lot of players could kick it. Now, the only thing I'd add to that was I can remember another player called Frank Neary, an enormous man who used to play at centre forward, who was a very lazy sort of centre forward. He just used to wait for the ball to come up, but he had this incredible shot, really, really hard. And I once saw him take a free kick from way outside the penalty area, and he ran up and he hammered this ball, and the Torquay goalkeeper was standing on the line, actually saved it, but the force of the kick lifted the Torquay player off his feet and into the net, and I was standing behind that. So, you know, my best goal is that, but my best player is Johnson, Tommy Johnson. Of course, they named the stand after him as well.